FBI didn't know it. Namely, there was enough development had taken place so that the Rangers and the Panthers were integrated. They were working together, you know, and they had broken down these barriers, and therefore they knew at once that it was a police fake, you know, so nothing happened. And then the FBI had to mobilize another colonial force, namely Chicago police, and bring them in, and they did the job. They assassinated him in a straight Gestapo-style assassination. I mean, nothing covered up about it except by the press. But and it's very clear what happened, isn't it? That, okay, that's the kind of thing that happens in small detail, but it also happens in, you know, big, much bigger frame, and that's the kind of thing you have to overcome. Recognizing Hume's point exactly. If you can control opinion, you know, if you can get people to think for themselves and to work together, it's going to be very hard to do these things. So that's the method. It's always been the method for getting anywhere. You know, it was the method for getting rid of slavery, for, you know, for getting rid of feudalism, for feminism in the last 30, 40 years, for the achievements of liberation theology in Latin America until they were destroyed by violence in that case, because they couldn't compete with U.S. violence. You know, it's just a matter of, and that's our fault. You know, the fact that it was destroyed is our fault. We couldn't control our own criminals, and they were able to destroy it. You know, but I think if these things all tell you exactly what you have to do, and there's plenty of opportunities. I mean, we don't face death squads like they do in Central America, say. Oh, gee, I'm sorry. I'm talking too much as usual. Yeah, yeah. Shorter answers, right? Yeah, you are authoritarian.
I'd like to switch the focus to media control. In American society, a morphine or almost removal of the distinction between pure information and truth. What is the method of reversing this process, and what steps are involved in this?
First of all, I don't think it's got to do anything with modern America. I mean, it's always been the case, and it's perfectly good reasons for it, and the reasons go back to Hume's insight. I mean, you tell people the truth, you're in trouble. Why should you do it? So therefore, you try to control their opinion. That means mostly lie or mislead or distort and so on. What's the method for overcoming it? I mean, we all know that. What's the point of asking? We all know exactly what the method is. Try to be honest. You know, be honest. Try to figure out the truth for yourself. Work with others to try to figure it out. Try to disseminate it. It's not a big trick. I mean, like if any of you take science courses, like take biology. Yeah, what do you try to do in a biology course? Well, you try to find out the truth. If it happens to undermine what somebody else believed, well, fine, it undermines it. That's the way the game's played. And there's a little certain tiny sector of academic life, namely the natural sciences, in which this is just taken for granted. And the reason it's taken for granted is if you don't do it, you get nowhere, you know, and somebody else does it, and you're out of business. But in most fields of humanities and social sciences and so on, you don't have that kind of external discipline, you know. Mother Nature isn't standing there forcing you to be honest. And therefore there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of latitude for distortion and deceit. But the same techniques that are used in the sciences ought to be used here, and there's nothing, you know, there's no big secret about them. You know, everybody knows how to be honest. You know, everybody knows how to try to find out what's actually going on. I mean, you have to have experience. You know, you have to see what kind of deceit there's been in the past, and you know, you have to know what to look for and so on. But you know, these aren't esoteric skills. You know, this isn't quantum physics. I mean, this kind of stuff is available to everybody. That's why illiterate peasants in Latin America were able to do it very easily, or workers in you know, Lowell, Massachusetts, 150 years ago. It's because it's obvious. I mean, the skills are deceit. There's not much skill involved in being honest. In fact, a lot of your university and, you know, school and university training is teaching you how to carry out the skills of distortion and deceit. That's hard. It's much harder to tell lies and tell the truth. I mean, everybody knows that from their own lives. You know, you want to tell the truth about something you did, it's usually pretty easy. If you want to try to justify some rotten thing you did by making up lies, it's usually pretty hard. And that's true whether it's that, you know, you stole a toy from your 3-year-old brother or anything else. Telling the truth is always very easy, except for the personal cost that may be associated, but there's no skills to learn.
How in, let's say, bringing the whole media, how are we massaged using
How?
public massage using what you just explained about this?
Well, just take any day's paper and you're just deluged with it. You have to ask, what's the relationship between what's being described and what in fact is happening? Okay, so I don't know, I was just looking at the New York Times while I was eating breakfast, and it's full of examples. You can start with page 1 and run right through. So, for example, there's a lot of discussion about anti-politics. You know, there's this great mood of anti-politics in the country. Well, interestingly, they actually quote somebody who tells the truth, some working class person who says, yeah, Congress is rotten, and the reason is Congress is big business. Okay, that's true. The reason why Congress is rotten is because Congress is big business, and big business runs the country, and that's rotten. But try to find that discussed somewhere. So that means that the problem isn't anti-politics. You know, it's not opposition to government. It's not the stuff that's in all the headlines, anti-politics. The problem is the authoritarian control that happens to use politics as its medium. So you're supposed to see the politics, and but not see the control that's hidden behind. Well, that's actually it's obvious to this guy they quoted, but that's hidden. All right, there's one example. Or take the article on Haiti. Actually, a good reporter down there, John Kiffner of the New York Times, he's actually the guy who exposed the police raid against the police assassination of Hampton. He was never able to publish much about it. Like the Times Magazine wouldn't run a story that he wrote about it. He was a young reporter then, and he exposed the lies. The Chicago press was simply reporting the police lies. But he actually went to the room and noticed that the gunshots were all inside, not outside, and exposed it. And he's a pretty good reporter. I suspect that's one reason he never gets anywhere on the New York Times. Like he's the one older reporter who's never been a bureau chief or anything like that. Anyhow, he's an honest reporter, and when he goes somewhere, he usually tells the truth. Okay, so he's in Haiti now, and he's telling the truth. I mean, the truth is that the American forces there, the Haitians have been told you're not supposed to take revenge. In other words, impunity reigns. Those were our killers, and you're not allowed to go after them. No justice. That's the rule. But so the Haitians are doing it. Like they're finding these attachés, these murderers, the paramilitaries who the security forces use to do most of their dirty work, and they're handing them over to the American Army, because that's what they're told to do by Aristide and others. Just don't kill them, hand them over to the American Army. So what's the American Army doing? Well, it's handing them over to the Haitian police. That is the guys they always worked with and worked for. I mean, it's like, taking some Nazi killer and handing him over to the Gestapo to take care of him. So, of course, what happens is the Haitian police release them. And in fact, Kiffner points out there that, they're supposed to have gone to the National Penitentiary, but then he checked at the National Penitentiary and they're not there. Well, what happened? You don't have to be a big genius to figure it out. All right, if you read through this, you begin to understand exactly what the U.S. invasion is about. I mean, it's about maintaining the traditional power structure, including its military apparatus, which we set up in the first place. Now, that's not what the headline says. You have to sort of read it with minimal intelligence to figure out that that's what it means. And if you go, or take, there's a big story on North Korea. Clinton, huge foreign policy triumph. Clinton succeeded in getting North Korea to shift its nuclear weapons production over to some other form of production. Minor footnote, that's exactly what North Korea's been asking for the last couple of years. And in fact, you don't have to go very far to find that out here. You can go down the street to Northwestern University, where they have I happened to meet him at breakfast this morning. There's a friend of mine named Bruce Cummings, who's the world's, the leading expert on Korea in the United States. He's been pointing this out for years, but he can't get into the press, even though he's the major American specialist on Korea, the guy who wrote the big, fat, 1,000-page books and so on. But he can't get interviewed, can't get in the press. Why? Well, because he's been saying exactly what's been obvious, and which is now presented as a great triumph of American diplomacy, because, ultimately, after having waved fists around and, gotten near war and had military maneuvers, we finally turned out to be politically expedient to do it. Okay, that's another story. And we can just go on from there, You ask how it's done, take a look at any column in the newspaper, you'll figure out how it's done. And in fact, read your textbooks, and you'll find out the same thing, because they're not very different. I don't know who's calling on people. Are you? Yeah. Okay.
Do you believe that the general public will remain marginalized for the rest of U.S. history, or do you believe there will be or is a movement of
Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I think there's one thing that we can predict with fair certainty. If the U.S. public remains marginalized, there isn't going to be much history to worry about. Because we're not living in the 18th century. The problems may be sort of similar, but they're quite different in scale. And the problems that are not very far away have to do with human survival. And hence, if the public in the most powerful country in the world remains marginalized, we don't have to worry much about history, because there isn't going to be any. So like take, say, Central America, which is the region that we have most control. We've controlled it for 100 years, so that tells us really what we are. It's quite possible that much of Central America will be uninhabitable in another couple of decades. Like Nicaragua, for example, which is one of the main targets of our attack. Actually, we attacked Nicaragua first in 1854. That's when the U.S. Navy first shelled Nicaragua, and it's been that way since then, so we have a lot of influence there. It's losing its water supply. The reason is that people are so desperate after the American attacks, which intensified in the 80s, that they're starving, and they're going up to doing the only thing they can. You know, you go up in the hills to cut wood and try to find some land to work and so on. That eliminates the forest cover. Streams start drying up. The land can't absorb water. Lakes are drying up. There's on top, it happens to be a drought, but the water supply may disappear. And as the pressures continue, it may become a desert. That could be true of Haiti. Haiti, in fact, is kind of like almost a parable of Western savagery. I mean, when Columbus landed, that was the first place Columbus landed, Haiti, and he thought it was a paradise. You know, it was the richest place in the world, also probably the most densely populated place in the world. And in fact, it remained that way. I mean, France is a rich country because, in large measure, because they stole Haiti's resources. Haiti was the richest colony in the world right through the 18th century. In fact, early in this century, right before Woodrow Wilson invaded Haiti, you look at the American government studies and so on, scholarship, they were still describing Haiti as a major resource center. It happened to be an extremely rich place. Well, when you fly into Haiti today, as you fly in, you see that the island is Haiti and Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic we've also brutalized, but Haiti much more so. When you fly over the border, you see it. On one side it's brown, on the other side it's sort of semi-green. The brown side is Haiti, the richest place in the world. It may not last another decade or more, and literally may become totally uninhabitable. And that's extending elsewhere. And it involves us too, like the rich and the powerful are going to survive longer, but these effects are very real. And they're getting worse. They're getting worse as more and more people are getting marginalized. I mean, the percentage of the world's population that has no role in profit-making is increasing. And if profit-making is the only human value, that part of the population, bigger and bigger here too, is going to become destructive because there's nothing else for them to do. And when you're destructive these days, it's not like being destructive 200 years ago. The techniques of destruction are vastly escalated. The environmental problems, for example, are much more significant in scale. I mean, nobody really understands much about complicated things like, the weather and so on. But there's a fair possibility. I mean, a possibility high enough so that no rational person would exclude it, that within a couple hundred years, the world's water level will have risen high enough so that most of human life will have been destroyed. Well, we don't do anything about that. It's not impossible that that'll happen. In fact, it's even likely. So the answer is, if you remain marginalized, there's not going to be much history to worry about. And whether people will react or not, who knows? That's free. Everyone's got to decide. I don't think so. In fact, American history has been rather different. I mean, look, there's a lot of problems. The political system was, in fact, set up as very anti-democratic. You have to remember, all the founding fathers hated democracy. Jefferson was a partial exception, but only partial. But for the most part, they hated democracy. The U.S. didn't even become formally democratic until about the mid-19th century. The original idea was that, I'm quoting now, the people who own the country ought to govern it. That was the favorite maxim of John Jay, the first chief, head of, what do you call him, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and, head of the Constitutional Convention, and so on. The people who own the country ought to govern it. That was the principle on which the country was founded. But if you look at the way it worked over the years, it turned out very often that concentration of power in Washington empowered people as distinct from concentration of power in states. And there were reasons for that. Businesses in power, the people who own the country are there everywhere. But in states, locally, they're often more powerful. They can often concentrate more power in the states than they can in the federal government, where, let's say, national popular movements were able to influence them. So if you look at some of the things that really improved the country, like, say, the New Deal measures, which sort of brought the United States into partially at least, into the main framework of industrial society, most of that was coming from Washington and against the states. And in fact, if you really look at who was behind it, it was often big business as opposed to small business. Like big corporations like, say, General Electric, who had small labor forces, and they were very capital intensive and had international orientations. They were supporting New Deal measures. The mainstream business was opposing them. It was labor intensive and it wasn't internationalized. And for a corporation like GE, it was better to have an organized workforce that didn't carry out wildcat strikes, and that you could be sure was going to work pretty regularly, even if you paid them a little more money, because they weren't labor intensive anyway. And the combination of centralized big business and powerful popular movements operating through Washington was able to overcome the more distributed power of private power that was in the states. Well, those are things that happen in societies based on power, power structures. So I don't think it's true that centralization is, centralization is a bad thing in principle, but not when you have private power. When you have private power, centralization can sometimes be a good thing, although ultimately it's a bad thing, and you want to decentralize, but only after other structures of power are dismantled. And you can see it from American history. You really look at the details of American history, you see this working out. Quite commonly, the power of the central government has been able to overcome the private power, which is more decentralized, in the interests of the population. Not always, but sometimes. So I don't think there are any simple formulas about that. The real problem is the private power.
Time for one more question.
I grew up watching the 6 o'clock news, the New York Times, out of an innocent curiosity to find out what was really going on. And in my ignorance, I believed that perception of world events was the real one. And now I find out that it's not, and that there are many other hidden things going on. My question I put to you today is, how do I identify the real sources? And because you obviously have access to sources that I just
That's not true. I don't have access to anything you don't have access to. There's no secrets in this game. And furthermore, there is no method other than the method that you would pursue if you were taking a biology class or a chemistry class. You have to try to figure out how to evaluate evidence. And that's just a skill that you learn. I mean, when you're doing the natural sciences, that's what it's about. It's like apprenticeship. You pick up the skill of trying to figure out how to evaluate evidence and test theories and see what makes sense and so on. You do the same thing in ordinary life. There is no source you can go to that's going to tell you the truth. Ultimately, you rely on your own critical faculties. Period. There's nothing more to say about it. I mean, you should take for granted that any powerful institution, like, say, the New York Times or the 6 o'clock news, is obviously going to try to mislead and control you. I mean, that should be a truism. What are they in business for?